Oh. Yay! I got to orient myself here. I feel like I'm on one of those boats. I've got a big drum and you're all rowing. Hi, I'm Nick Law. Just a quick introduction of myself. So I'm currently at Publicis Groupe. I have a title, a creative title across the group, and I have a president title with the communications hub, which is all of the agencies. Prior to being at Publicis, I was at a company called RGA for 17 years. I started at RGA in 2001 when there was about 100 people, and when I left there were 2,000 people with 20 offices around the world. And the thing that we were known for at RGA was using technology in a creative way. We were a company that grew up with the web, and we changed our capabilities as often as the web changed. So we built a reputation first in doing useful things, but also at the end of the time that I was there, we did some big films and more classic communications, and we combine all of those things. But I'm going to talk today specifically about the topic or the theme of this conference. I'm not going to show you any case studies. I'm not going to try to sell you anything. I'm just going to talk about AI and technology because I think it's a really interesting time for the industry. And as creative people, our relationship with technology is really important. And I'm going to argue it's always been important, but the reason it's more important now is just because of the pace of change. So the first thing is the obvious thing, and I think there's probably a lot of people in the audience that would sympathize with this, right? So a human brain, and our ability to be creative is not the same as AI. We have this idea that AI is somehow magical, right? But it isn't. It's been built by humans, and most AI isn't as clever as you think it is, right? There are actually a lot of things about AI which are very simple. Most AI is basically compound decision making. It's the ability to make a lot of decisions very quickly. And that's not, and because AI was built by humans, there are enough humans in the world that have built AI that we understand it, we know what it is, right? But we don't understand the human brain. We sort of have an idea about it. We're starting to figure it out. Neuroscience is very young, but the brain is magic because we don't understand it completely. AI is not magic because we built it and we understand it. It might be amazing, and there might be some people that don't understand it and think it's magic because they didn't build it. But humans built AI. It is not magic. Brains are magic because we don't understand them. We understand something, but there's so much. We do not understand consciousness. Science does not understand that. We have a lot to learn. So that means that essentially we don't understand ourselves, and we don't understand what we're capable of. And it's a very important thing because in the end our industry is trying to create magic. Now, we're going to use technology to help us get there, but there's nothing about the technology that's magic, right? We're selling magic. Our competitors, who are the consultancies, in-house agencies, and the big digital platforms, they don't sell this. They don't sell this. They sell software, they sell risk management, they sell whatever your clients sell. But in most cases, right, we sell this. This is what we sell. Our value is our creativity, right? But for us to be creative, as a creative practitioner, we need two things. And we've always needed two things, always. This is not new, right? I'm not saying that there's anything new about this, right? We've always needed data and technology, always. So when you hear people say, oh, shit, I can't get this, data is making me less creative, or technology is making me less creative, that's just not true. And I'll explain why it's not true. Right? The first reason is we all use data as creative people. This baby is not very creative. The baby is not very creative because it hasn't experienced much. Data is just experience. You become a good creative practitioner the longer you practice, the more mistakes you make, the more things that you do well, the more conversations you have with your friends, the more times you get in a fight at a bar, the more times you go to a museum, the more times you get out there and watch a sunset or have an argument with your spouse. This is what makes us creative. We can't be creative without inputs. And we take all of that experience, that beautiful human experience, and we synthesize it, and we're creative. That makes us creative, right? So if you think about data as just experience, then we're at a point now where we can augment that experience, and we can extend that experience because of our ability to pick up signals that we call data. Now, there are plenty of experiences that I have that don't make me creative, or that I could take or leave, right? I could get into a fight and break my nose and walk out of the pub, and it's not very useful. And it's true also that there's going to be some data that you're put in front of you as a creative person that you don't find very useful. But there's going to be a lot of data that needs a creative person to take it in, to synthesize it, and then do an intuitive leap. It's not enough to just look at data as a continuous trend line. All the stuff that we get is from the past. Just by definition, you can't look at data from the future. You can hope that your data predicts something, but the future is complicated. So often your ability to use data as experience is connected to your ability to see patterns, to understand if that piece of data and that piece of data and that piece of data, if I triangulate those things, it probably means this is going to happen. It probably means I should do that. It probably means the person I'm going to try to reach is going to be on Instagram at Thursday at 10 o'clock, right? So there are all sorts of ways that you can use data, but just treat it as experience. That's all data is. It's extended experience. The more data, the more experience, the more creative you can be. The other word that we as a creative community have problems with is technology. And the reason is we assign that word to anything that was invented after we became good. All the stuff that was invented before I started my job, somehow that's not technology, right? I would argue that if you're really good at doing TV, if you're in a team that does awesome TV, you're a creative technologist. You're a creative technologist because TV is a technology. It's a really complicated technology, and it changed the industry when it came along. TV is a complicated, stylistic technology. It's a medium that you need to use over and over again to get good at it. There's nothing natural about cutting up pieces of movement, sticking them together, and then putting music over the top. If I showed that to someone from ancient Greece, who's just sat in front of a Greek theater, if I took them from first century Greece and put them in front of a TV spot, they wouldn't understand it, right? Because the technology that they understand is different. So we've always used technology. As a creative community, we need to understand that. And one of the great impediments for this very simple understanding is that creative people in a particular part of our industry have decided that it's not about the medium, it's about a big idea. I think big ideas are bullshit. They're bullshit. And the reason is, as a creative person, as a practitioner who makes stuff, because in the word creative is the word create, you need to be able to visualize what you're going to make. And the only way you can visualize what you make is to see it in a medium. It doesn't exist until it's in a medium. And when I walk into agencies and people say, oh, it's about the big idea, Once we get the big idea, then we can put it anywhere. And it's funny, when I look at what they call a big idea, it looks a lot like a tagline or a fucking script, an anthem. That's not a big idea. That's a beautiful execution or it's a bad execution. It might speak to something that's an idea, but by itself, an idea has to be executed. So there's no reason, for example, that a big idea can't be a search field. That was Google's big idea. Before Google did any advertising, we understood that brand so profoundly and we so loved it because of a search field. That's the brand. It didn't have to have a tagline. In fact, it didn't. It didn't do any advertising for decades, and we still understood it as a brand. So we need to start thinking about technology as just mediums. So the reason that this photo's up here is that the metaphor that I use for our relationship with technology as creative people is, so just pretend that sand is a technology, right? That's the medium that I'm going to be creative with. My finger and the sand, right? That's the medium. That's a technology. When I think about it, what I'm going to draw in that sand, before I put my finger in the sand, I already know, because I know what sand is, what it can support and what it can't support. I know, for example, that I can't draw a very fine illustration, like a Leonardo da Vinci sort of portrait. It's not going to work. The sand will not support it, right? So the idea is connected to the medium so profoundly that I draw knowing what the medium will support. And we've fooled ourselves for 50 years, right? Because we've been so stuck on doing TV and using that as a proxy for ideas that we think that we're coming up with these big ideas that are somehow a principle, but they're not. They're just a practice. All of our ideas are practice. Strategy is different, but creative ideas always live in execution. And we need to stop talking about technology being against creative, because it's the opposite. We are incapable of being creative without technology. It's impossible to be creative without technology. It's just what you call technology and what your kids call technology and your grandmother calls technology. They're just different things, right? So, why are we so scared of technology? So part of the reason we're scared of technology is it takes a while when new technology comes along for us to master it, for us to understand it. So when Gutenberg came up with the printing press, it took a while before punctuation was invented, because the monks before the printing press came along, when they were using quills to write in scrolls and books, they didn't use punctuation. And spelling was not standardized across any language. It wasn't standardized. Printing, it took decades before there was a uniformity around how you used the printing press. And in more recent times, if you look at really, really early film, it looks like theater that's being filmed. So the grammar of the old technology, which was theater, is being applied to the new technology, which is film. It's true for TV. If you look at early TV, it looks like someone who's reading radio being filmed. It takes a while for us to get up to speed with the grammar of something, right? I think it's also it's true of most recent example I would give is TV dramas. So in America, TV drama 20 years ago was very simple compared to what it is now, right? The grammar of that has changed with the advent of HBO and Netflix and Amazon. They're very much more complex. The language of drama on TV is very different. Again, if you took someone from 20 years ago and put him in front of a Netflix series now, they would be very confused because of the multiple plot lines. It's very dense. But our literacy grew with the experimentation, and so we've got to this point. And interestingly, if you apply the same logic to advertising, if you take an ad from 20 years ago and you put it in TV now, it looks like it belongs. And that's a problem for our industry. We are not playing with the grammar of our medium in the same way that other practitioners are, right? So one of the reasons that this uptake and this mastery of mediums matters is that since the advent of the web, mediums, we went from printing to photography, to film, to radio, and then since the advent of the web, since everything has been connected, the formats that we have at our disposal as creative people have just grown exponentially, right? There are more formats now to be creative in than ever, any time ever. The problem is they're happening so quickly. So the time it takes for someone to master a creative community, to master a medium, we're getting less time. We haven't even mastered mobile as a medium, and we've got all these other. We've got voice interfaces. We've got all sorts of strange mediums that are being invented. So this is the big challenge, right? If you look at what the web has done, it's created this incredible ecosystem of mediums for us, and it's happened because what the web does is it connects people, and it connects people really efficiently. And when you connect two ideas, you create a third idea. That is the definition of innovation. It's two existing ideas that when you combine them, it becomes a third idea. There's nothing new. There's just recombinations of old things. And so the web has created this incredible proliferation of mediums, and it's a difficult thing for us to get on top of. So what I'm going to talk about is our relationship to technology as creative people, like how we use technology and data. And I'm going to split up the most recent eras of how we've used technology. I'm going to talk about creativity when computing came along. What happened to us when computing came along, when we were using interfaces, and then I'm going to talk about creativity when the internet connected us all. And the last chapter is going to be about creativity and AI, which is a chapter which is still to be written, but I think it's a really important one, and it's the theme of this conference. All right, so let's go into creativity and computing. I'm 52 years old. So when I first started working in the creative industries when I was 19. I didn't go to college. I have no education. But I did learn how to use a drafting table. So when I was in my first job, this was the technology that I used. It was a drafting table, and I stuck type up, and I would send out to get type. There were these houses called typesetting houses, and you would send them a marked up galley. You'd send it out, and a few days later, you would get type set in the way that you wanted. You'd look at it and you'd say, "Well, that's not right," and you'd mark it up again. You'd send it out. You get another, and then you'd cut it up and you'd put it on. So it took a long time to create stuff. You did a lot of planning, and this was true even in the beginning of the web. So I used Photoshop 1.0. I remember using Photoshop 1.0, and I remember you had to plan it. There were no layers. In the first version of Photoshop, there were no layers. There was only one undo. So you had to plan everything. You had to plan it. It took a long time to use Photoshop when it first came out, right? But we're at a point now where we have almost instantaneous visualization of our ideas. I was just in the middle of this big global pitch, and right up until the 11th hour, hours before we were presenting, we were coming up with ideas, editing them as film, putting visual effects on it, and we had pieces, and we were walking in and presenting stuff hours before the presentation. We'd spent like 6 weeks fucking around doing nothing. It always happens, right? And then at the end, and one of the reasons we do that is because we can create almost instantly now. So what happened when creativity met computing was that execution caught up with thinking. Right? So you can execute as quickly now as you can think. And what that means is not only can you work quicker, but you can explore a lot more. When I was planning back in the day, pasting things to a board, I couldn't do multiple options. I had to imagine what this one option be, and then it would be executed a week later. With the tools at my disposal now, because of computing and interfaces and software, I can explore 50 ideas in an hour, because I can visualize them instantly. So it's an amazing thing. It's an amazing thing that it did. It made creativity really interesting, right? And so then these computers that we had, they got connected to this thing called the internet. It wasn't that long ago. It was in the mid-90s when I first looked at stuff through Mosaic, right? And it changed creativity forever. Now, it changed a lot of things, It changed the media environment, and it really disrupted our industry, and it's catching up with us right now. But if you think about it as a creative community, what it did was, all of a sudden, you could look at stuff from all over the world. So this was a CG animation done by a Scottish guy called Brian Taylor at the beginning, in the early 2000s. It was called Rust Boy. And he was using old software that had been discontinued, and he was creating this CG animation, and he was posting it every day so people could see his progress. And it became a bit of a thing in the early 2000s. So he was a guy who was living, I think, in Aberdeen or something, some miserable Scottish town. And he was creating this beautiful piece of art using computing. But most importantly, there were people all over the world that were watching him do it. So what do you think that did? Well, people started to copy what he was doing. They started to build on top of it. And there was a whole sort of language around CG that was coming out of bedrooms, not out of Hollywood. It was a very interesting time. I already mentioned this. You know, one of the things that the internet did to TV is it connected a lot of really interesting TV writers. And now TV is the place where the most creative storytellers are. It used to be that TV was where crap was, and movies was where the excellent stuff is. It's switched around because it's more connected to the internet now. Some of the biggest producers of TV series are Amazon, Netflix. They're digitally born. So it's not surprising to me that the artists that create this TV are learning from each other rapidly. They're connecting and learning from each other, connecting and learning from each other. And the other thing that happens when you connect a whole bunch of things is what I said before, which is about innovation, which is that you start combining mediums, right? So Instagram, which is a phenomenal creative platform, it's one of the biggest creative platforms ever created. It couldn't happen until you had a phone that had GPS, so you could tag it, that had a good camera, so that had the ability for you then to connect it to social, so social networks had to be. And so, this was contingent on everything connecting. This wouldn't exist if we didn't have computing first and then a connected world that happened through the internet. So that was an amazing thing, right? But the issue with that, right, is that invention was accelerated by connection. So you got to the point that I'm talking about now, at the beginning, which is that we've lost our ability to catch up as practitioners of mediums, right? We don't have time to master all of the opportunities. We're running out of time. Like RGA, when I was at RGA, we worked on mobile in the early 2000s, right? Before the iPhone came along, we created little websites, right? And no one else was doing it. I jumped forward 15 years, and still, when I walk into an agency, I'm not seeing people starting on the phone. There's an apocryphal story about Mark Zuckerberg calling in his executives at Facebook and saying, I don't want to see any work that's designed on a desktop browser. Everything has to be on a phone, right? Because he saw where things were going. And in the space of a year, Facebook's revenues went from 90% on desktop to almost 90% on phone. That's the moment we're at in this industry, right? There are all these new mediums, and if we don't catch up, and if we don't become just as good at telling modular storytelling or understanding how we can use AR for our clients, then we are going to die. We're going to die, right? And so we're at this point where I think AI can be the thing to help. So in the first instance, the tools, the technology made us work a lot quicker, and our mind, our thinking was matched by execution. The second phase was when there were so many mediums created because of all these connected people that we fell back, and now we're trying to catch up. And I think that AI is a very interesting tool to augment our creativity. As I said before, AI is not magic, right? AI might be able to copy creativity, but it can only copy something because it's already been done, right? It's not very good at understanding what moves us. It has no idea what's happening in culture. It's got no idea what happened yesterday, right? And this is the thing about AI, this amazing what's happening in AI, but it is still not a creative tool. So AlphaGo was an incredible example of the power of AI. This is a very complex game, and what at the seat of the AI of the AlphaGo experiment was deep machine learning. So what that was dependent on was, like hundreds and hundreds of engineers, but most importantly, they were entering into the knowledge graph all these instances of games of Go. The more games of Go that were put in, the more it was able to infer what would be the best thing to do. But it was dependent on a lot of stuff, right? What's interesting though now is that to create that amount of data, you don't need to enter it anymore. They've figured out how to make the AI simulate its own games. So it's not dependent on entry of outside data. It can create its own data based on it knows the rules, so it can just create infinite games and learn from it, learn from it, learn from it. So we're at this point where AI is not dependent on huge data sets in every case. In many cases it is, that AI can, in some cases, create its own data set. And that's really interesting if you think about how that might augment us. We're in this period now where we've got all of these new mediums, right? And the new medium, which is going to become very big, probably not in the short term, but in the long term will be profound in the way that it affects the way we tell stories and the way we experience media, is VR. And what's interesting about VR is that if I'm a storyteller, what I'm good at is linear thinking. What I'm good at is figuring out the revealed moment, right? The revealed moment is the next thing, the next thing, the next thing. It's time. It's the next revealed time. So you have control over that time as a storyteller. But in VR, the drama of VR is the next revealed space. It's not the next revealed moment. It's the next, you go there, you go there, you go there, you can go anywhere. So all of a sudden, the drama that you're creating, the story that you're telling, is dependent, right, on where someone goes, not them just sitting there and looking at what you're doing. Now, there are all sorts of things that we need to think about, like maybe the best people to work on VR storytelling in gaming are gaming designers. But I think we have to reach a higher level of sophistication. We're going to expect to use this medium in a way that has more mastery than that, right? And so what I would suggest is that there are certain things that we could use in AI that could help us do that. Like, so for example, the instance of AlphaGo. This is a AI decision tree for tic-tac-toe or noughts and crosses, right? It's very simple. It's a kid's game. It's very simple. So you could imagine this sort of compound decision tree that you have for AlphaGo. It must be incredibly complex. But you also have a decision tree when you're trying to tell a story in space, right? And if I want execution to catch up to thought, then maybe I need to start looking at what the scenarios are in space. I'm writing like a VR experience, and I should be able to generate very quickly possible scenarios, right? It'll be more organic. It'll be more like this. There'll be a lot more sort of subtlety to it. And I should be able to, in the same way that in the first generation, I was able to pre-visualize something as I was thinking about it using Photoshop or using video editing. I should be able to pre-visualize using AI all the scenarios that a story might go, right? And what the dramatic consequences of that. Because if you think about the revealed moment is about a bunch of consequences. If the revealed space is about multiple consequences, I'm going to design my space based on where the most interesting consequences are going to unfurl. And I think there's going to be a time where we are creating these new experiences using AI because they're going to be very complex. When we live them as consumers after the creative person has created them, they're going to feel beautiful and random and human and dramatic because life is like that. Life isn't linear. It's not expected. We're going to be creating stories. And this is just one instance of, I think, where AI could help storytelling. But we are going to be creating these experiences that where we need to be able to imagine and pre-visualize a lot of things at the same time. And I think AI is going to probably be the thing that is the engine that helps us do that. Now, of course, AI is not going to be oh, I'm going to use my AI now. By the time we get to a point where we have these tools, AI is going to be embedded in almost everything. It's already starting to get embedded into everyday experiences, right? So I think that's a very interesting thing. And so what we have the ability to do is to catch up, get control of these new mediums as they're getting invented, like, and we'll be able to do it with AI. We'll be able to master all these inventions, right? And so that's my hope. So I think that there is a possibility that AI will not replace creative in the same way that Photoshop didn't replace creativity, or the web didn't create. It did quite the opposite. It made us more able to be more creative, more people, quicker. And so I think that this is actually a very interesting thing. Now, what tends to happen when these new technologies are created is that the people that make the technology, they can't imagine how it's going to be used, right? There's a sort of famous story about Alexander Bell, I think it was, when he created the gramophone. You know the gramophone, the old, where you put the record on it. So he thought that the gramophone, when he invented it, was going to be used for sermons, for saving people's last words before they die. He had a whole list of things that you could use a gramophone for. In the end, it was used for music. That was its killer app. It was music. And so I think as these tools are developed, we won't even know how we're going to use them. But they're going to, in most cases, make life easier. So they're the three stages. And this is the thesis, right? In the first stage, execution caught up with our thinking. In the second stage, invention accelerated because of the connections and got ahead of us. And now we have the ability to get back by mastering this proliferation of mediums by using AI. So why are we scared of technology? We should be so excited. If you're a young creative right now, the last thing you would want to do is the thing that people mastered, during the creative revolution in the 60s. Why don't you want to go and master modular content, or VR, or become the best storyteller in Instagram? I think these are mediums that have yet to have a grammar, a mature grammar. We're in the early days. We're in the days of when TV was being filmed as radio, right? And so, as a young creative, you should want to work with these technologies. You should want the data to help you be smarter. And at some point, AI is going to make you quicker and more creative also. I'm going to end on this thought, right? So this is Martin Scorsese, right? He's one of the great visual artists of the century. And his medium was film. And Kodak, for a long time, was a huge and important company. Kodak, as a company, made more money and was bigger than anything that Martin Scorsese was attached to. But Martin Scorsese took that technology and he made it magic. He made it magic. So we're at this point now where I don't think that in 10 years' time, I want Facebook to come into my agency and to teach me best practices. They shouldn't be teaching us best practices. We should be teaching them best practices. Kodak was not teaching Scorsese how to be a great director, right? Let's take these mediums, say, just leave me with it. I'm going to use it and I'm going to come back to you and tell you how to use it, because that's how creativity works. That's what we should be doing. Instead, we're complaining about technology and data and all these stupid things. Like, embrace it. This is an awesome time. This industry may not survive in its current state. It might collapse and be rebuilt on a new set of plumbing. That's what happened to music. Music shrunk by 2/3. And it was rebuilt on a different platform, right, which was streaming. The same thing is going to happen to our industry. It's going to be rebuilt on new platforms. So you want to become a master of those platforms and have some fun, like this crazy old bastard did. So that's it. That's all I've got to say. We've got 4 minutes if anyone wants to ask a question before you have a drink, or you just go and get a drink. You can just get a drink, or get me a drink. Any questions? I give you an early mark then. Go and get a drink. Thank you.